Continue on. Two. Yeah, so this is another item that was left over from the last meeting, and I mean, I think that I guess the bottom line of this from the minutes kind of says it all. Alan Strong will circle back after Mark and Roz have had a chance to discuss within Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department. So I guess I'll maybe start there, and any conversation about the pond sliders or, sort of next steps in terms of thinking about them as a invasive species.
Alan, could you bring up our letter?
Probably.
Because our ask is really at the bottom of that letter, and we can just go over that again briefly.
Yes, I mean, I talked with Luke Rothleaf briefly about this, and he agrees about the threat of the species and the importance of taking measures if we can. But we haven't gone into the conversation of what that would look like and what would be the implications and what would be the processes. And I don't think Mark and I have talked about it.
Right. Yeah, there you go. So I guess I'll do a little review. This is a species that was the most popular and still is the most popular pet turtle. It's the one that shows up in pet stores. It's the one that showed up sometimes with its shell painted for saying happy birthday or Merry Christmas on the back of it. And they used to sell it in little plastic containers with a little coconut tree. And many of these, because it's a relatively long-lived species, many of these pets lose interest to their owners, and they have become released they're often released, and they have one of the few species that can survive this far north. And so they have established populations in every state of the lower 48, except for Vermont and New Hampshire. And there's some question about about New Hampshire. We certainly have individuals that we have seen reported. Currently, we believe that their eggs can't mature here. It's just a little too cold for that, but they have tried to lay eggs. But I think that there's a real risk as summer's warm that this could become a breeding species, and that if we could get ahead of it and get it listed as a aquatic nuisance species and add all the subspecies of pond sliders. Red-eared slider is just one. It's the prettiest subspecies, and so that's the one that's most often sold. But I think we'd have to include all of the subspecies. Prevent the release of pond sliders through education, legal prohibition of release. Capture and eradicate pond sliders, and minimize the potential for release of more pond sliders by assuring existing pet pond sliders can be kept legally, if you have them already, kind of grandfathered in, because we don't want to force everybody to release them, but making it illegal to sell or buy or import pond sliders in Vermont. And we could get ahead of it, and that way perhaps we could keep populations from becoming established here. Happy to answer any questions, and that was real quick.
Well, I mean, it's kind of a review from last time, and I guess I'm just, I mean, is there, I mean, I mean, I guess this question is for Roz and Mark. Is there any, would you see any pushback on any of these, or is it really just getting into the, sort of deep regulatory stuff that, again, kind of takes capacity in somebody to push this forward?
I personally understand the need and see it. I think it just hasn't, it's just hard to get to this stuff for me.
Yeah, so
I can't speak for Mark and what there are concerns or, we'd have to figure out where to start. We can't do all this at once for sure. What are the priorities and what are the steps? And then we have to figure out when we're going to do them as much as regardless of how much we want to do it. I hate to keep saying, sounding complainy about this. It's just the reality. So there might be some, I wonder if there aren't, some things that are just easier than others or quicker or, some sort of rubric, like what's the most effective with least effort priority. Because when I see this, I'm like, wow, that's, a lot of hours that nobody has. So,
well, I'm also just sort of looking.
That's to add to the raw list.
Yeah, just sort of thinking about the, your unpaid support team and what can we do to help? I guess maybe that's sort of, I think, the question.
I'll add that, every time we get a report of one of these, and it's several times a year, Luke Groff has to drop what he's doing. Warden has to drop what he's doing.
Well, yeah,
Someone else, so it's not like we're investing. We're spending a lot of time on this.
Anyway,
at the least effective level of addressing a systemic problem.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, adding it to the list of restricted species, isn't that just internal and something that can be done relatively easily?
Good.
I don't know.
I gotta plead dumb, Jim. I think the answer is yes. But we haven't been involved doing it lately, and that seems simple. I don't know why we couldn't do that. I put the blame on me. I just haven't done anything on this. It just, we've been swimming lately, trying to tread water here for ever since with new people coming and going. We got more people leaving than coming. But that's the case. We could do that real quickly, right? John, have you got some experience doing some of these?
I mean, the species could be added to our restricted list tomorrow if we get the commissioner to sign on.
I don't think you'd oppose.
The only court issues them being is our endangered species or our importation rules doesn't allow for it. It's silent on the issue of grandfathering. So if it's a restricted species and all of a sudden people had it legally one day, doesn't mean they possess it illegally the next day. It's not the end of the world. We just need a policy, a way to say, here's how we're going to treat that. The piece about,
I think, hold on there. I mean, I would say, Jim, that, I think we maybe talked about this last time, that we probably are stuck with saying the ones that are here already are legal, right? I don't think there's any way that we can, right.
Correct. I mean, if it was a problem,
Depending on the magnitude.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
So there's that piece. The one about the adding it to the aquatic nuisance control statute, that's more laborious because of the awkwardness of the way that statute is written. It doesn't say, and any species on the list approved by the secretary is covered by the statute. The statute has the actual species baked into it.
Yeah.
So you have to add this thing to the
Like rulemaking, sort of. Yeah.
It's an awkward design for rulemaking. So we couldn't do that tomorrow, but if we could get that on track so that, perhaps the next time that rule is revised, we could add that. That would be great. And then, second, we've got the time that Roz is hoping we'll get. We need to work with this group and with others on a broader education campaign, on get ways to, convince people that if and when they do give up their turtles, not to let them loose, and, maybe there's some way to get them out, get them to a better spot. I don't know, but I think we fall off that bridge when we get to it.
Just in response, John, to that, get them to a better spot. I don't think there is a better spot. I mean, the other states that have tried to take on relocating people's pond sliders, there's just too many of them. So I think the best hope we have is to have people, if they currently have it as a pet, to keep it as a pet. We don't want to try to relocate them.
It was a euphemism for that farm upstate, Jim.
Yeah, yeah.
Or personally, I would think we would do a collaborative effort with the Asian turtle food market trade and use that money as match for conservation of turtles here.
Just don't go public with that.
Out of the box, John.
I see commissioner written all over you, John.
Yeah.
Yeah, Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just curious. I totally support this notion, and definitely, preventing invasives from being sold is the way to go as an initial step to try to head these things off. I'm curious, there's a zillion plants that would similarly deserve to be treated this way, and I'm wondering, it sounds like it's a very simple matter potentially to put this on the restricted species list. Is that true for plants as well, or is there an entirely separate process whereby plants become prohibited from sale? And I guess related to that, like, what kind of pushback would you expect on this from people, the pet trade, essentially, folks who are selling these things?
So the plant piece is the Agency of Agriculture, and we have a rule in place that actually has specifically designated species listed within that rule, which, as has been discussed, is difficult to go through the APA process to amend that list. However, I have a plan, and I hope to execute it within 18 months of December to delink that so that we can work with the committee, not unlike this committee and subcommittees, as appointed by the Secretary of the Agency of Agriculture, to amend that list a little more flexibly rather than it being embedded in a rule, because that's just not functional, and it irks me. But so that's the plant thing, and more to come. Happy to share once we get the ball rolling on that. But you all can address the list.
Wonder if there could be a simultaneous sister effort to do that.
For the aquatic
Product nuisance list.
So what Stephanie just said is a huge thing from some of our perspectives, so thank you for that.
Yeah.
It's intense.
Yeah. But Matt,
Costly.
to answer another part of your question, wild animals are by law owned by everyone.
Yeah.
Wild plants are owned by the landowner,
Right.
unless they are on the threatened or endangered species list. We don't have a handle on what people can do on private property or necessarily even on some public property.
Yep.
So that's the real difference there.
So the last time the plant rule was amended, I think, was 2011 or 2012. So at this point, it is pretty wildly out of date.
Yeah.
And there's some really interesting research that's come out in the meantime showing that most states' invasive species plant lists are sort of very, embarrassingly reactive to invasive species, rather than doing what we're talking about with the slider, where we're looking at climate change, and we're actually, because about 65% of the plants that are being 65% of invasive plants are introduced through horticulture. That's the primary way that a lot of invasive species are getting around. So that part is very preventable if we just have it up front.
Yeah.
And that's what hasn't been happening. We don't really have, only a few of those plants are not here that we're quarantining.
Yep.
And there are dozens on our list that could be that are sort of on the radar.
Yes, and that's actually, so again, like, we're thinking and we're
Yeah,
thinking
that's
about
great.
like
Here.
putting plants of concern, like, expanding our actual list to include other plants and being able to be responsive over time. But we applied for funding to do this, and we'll hear in December, which will light a fire for us. So anyway,
Yeah, that's
so
Rawa.
we are
Thanks,
thinking
Rawa.
about this.
That's
Great.
great
I
to
mean,
hear.
I mean, that's, not the question, but but what I think is
Which they
also
might.
interesting here is, this proposal makes me think, like, how often do the turtles come from online sales? Because we, at the Agency of Agriculture, we have the authority to regulate online sales, and we're wondering how others do it, if you guys regulate online sales and how you actually achieve it.
We
'Cause it's
can't.
really hard.
We can't, I could, in 5 minutes, I could order, a few hundred spotted and spiny soft-shelled turtles that are endangered, and they'll be here in 2 days.
Yep.
So we can't do that part. We just don't have the capacity,
Yeah.
and other states, they're just, they're cranking them out. So Matt, back to your other question as far as pushback. We would probably, before we got much further, we'd want to talk with a few folks in the pet trade in the state. But I think in general, by this time, while the pond sliders were, the most popular, easiest to produce, to distribute turtle, I think that everyone wants something cooler and newer and not standard. So I think, there's less demand for those. And the other part being there's with so few pet stores in Vermont, that we could probably work with those entities and say, we need you, if you haven't already phased out pond sliders, do that and go for something else.
And the agency registers. We have a list.
Yeah.
So, and you probably already know that.
Interesting. And hopefully they don't go for wood turtles instead.
Yeah, you could order those too online anytime you want.
Is
So
there any
how-
way that we're not already working with the agency as far as regulating pet stores that are,
Ours is a list of pet stores in order to ensure humane treatment, like we have, it's under.
Oh,
title.
not for, okay.
It's not to control
Oh,
what's
okay.
being sold, it's just, they have to register with the Agency of
Okay,
Agriculture.
got it.
Which creates a list that we have, but it's for humane
Okay.
treatment under Title 20.
But I think there are a number of people that say they breed ball pythons in the state. And I think when we direct them to you guys for a permit, they're told, oh, you're too small, don't bother. I think that's the case.
I don't know for certain.
So, it's just the probably, people that do it at a small level or in their kitchen, in
They
their
may
house.
not qualify.
They may not qualify, but that doesn't mean they're not putting animals out in homes. So,
I would,
so just lots of opportunity to
yeah, and I
do things.
when I hear Jim talking about pond slider, I think about all the other species and all the needs, and it would be lovely to wrap this into a RAWA funded, like larger, more holistic effort to deal with a bunch of things and not go species by species, but
Yes.
Well, let me, I guess I'll just, kind of reiterate, it seems like if there's, an effort moving forward from your agency, Stephanie, if there could be, a parallel process going on with the aquatic nuisance control statute, that seems like that could be really
Ours
cool.
is the APA process, so we're gonna go through the rulemaking process. It's not necessarily through you have to go before legislative
Yeah,
committee, but
uh-huh.
it's not like changing the law, it's just changing a different law, different process.
Yeah,
Filing papers with the Secretary of State's office, going through public hearings, and then having a rule in place that we can ultimately apply and to regulate
okay.
plants.
so I think it would be lakes and ponds maybe who would talk to about the aquatic nuisance list. And whether I don't know what their process is.
I don't know what the process is either. When I saw eradication, it made me think like what are we talking? I mean, it's not like a
Yeah.
pesticide medication, it's
Find and,
humane
yeah, seek and,
disposal.
yeah. And then I guess I was gonna ask you, Mark, is, you said, if the commissioner would sign on it, we could have it added to the restricted species list like tomorrow. Do you,
John attributed that knowledge.
okay, do you need us to write something
No,
up
we can-
or,
we can do
okay,
it. We can-
okay,
Oh, really?
We'll ask him, we'll just ask the commissioner if we feel, I guess I want to get, Luke supportive of this. And you, so I think he would be, I think we all would, so it's just,
Yeah.
and then it's, I don't understand, the other steps, we couldn't, can't commit to doing,
Okay.
but we'd love to.
Mhm.
I just don't, my question was, what will that accomplish, but.
What-
Step one.
Yeah.
With it, we would do outreach, we would want to do some outreach around that. We are just.
Yeah.
Are
We
there
are
other
adding
species that
this.
should be, that we're missing?
That's what I'm
Yeah.
wondering. That's what I was
That would
saying
be the first question that we should answer.
before we do it.
So the importation team, that our department has an wildlife importation team that is trying to keep track of that. And that's a few folks in the wildlife division and a couple wardens that are trying to monitor it's mostly reptiles and amphibians, but I get calls every once in a while for people wanting pet capybaras, for skunks, whatever's the hip cool thing on YouTube, it takes a week and then we start getting calls. So we're doing
John, could you check into that import, maybe the right way to do it, the importation team, and let us know is there any other species that, just so we're not sitting here 2 weeks later.
Yeah.
Can you guys tell us about this one,
Yeah.
Can I provide a little bit of information here?
Yeah.
You may or may not be aware that there's a real concern about importation of salamanders into the United States because of salamander chytrid in Europe that is killing off populations of salamanders. And when Mark mentions, are there other things we should be aware of? I think mainly the feds are trying to handle that at the federal level, but their efforts are probably missing. One of the things they're trying to do is make sure that or work in the direction where anything that's imported from overseas has to be certified as disease-free before it can be sold here. And that's the idea, but that certainly is not in place. Salamanders are not a particularly popular pet critter, but if you were to add something, importation of salamanders would be eliminating importation for salamanders or keeping them as pets would probably be useful in the long term. I suspect sooner or later we're going to get that disease. Somehow it's going to come from Europe and it's going to get here in the United States. So in terms of something that may come down the road in the future, salamanders would probably be it. And it's just strictly because of the diseases that they could release. Not that they could survive here, but that they could introduce pretty dangerous disease. And the other thing I just want to mention is that we did fill out another document that you have, which is the Vermont Invasive Exotic Animal Evaluation Worksheet. And frankly, I can't remember who we filled that out for, but it's an 8-page document that we filled out and you have it.
How long ago?
Oh, that
Last
was,
meeting.
yeah, at the last meeting. So there's a lot of information there for you.
Think.
If you get to that point at some point in the future.
What was the file name? Do you happen to know like a keyword in the file name?
I think it's the invasive species worksheet.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's also, I think it's linked right here, so.
So Jim, I appreciate you saying, I have no faith in certification programs
Yeah.
for wild animals coming in. We've gone back and forth with ag on that, our friendly partners, where they want to bring in certain things that we say, no, we've gone through this with, how do you think CWD spread through? Supposedly some certified herds. There's really not, but some of these things, I don't know how and who, and the quality control of certifying so-called disease-free. So that just let you know that I don't know what your take is on that, but.
I think I agree with you on that, Mark, that's unlikely to be, although it's a nice gesture, it's unlikely to be totally successful. And you only need a few individuals to come through to introduce a disease.
Yeah.
So I appreciate the discussion that's taken place. I think we've covered some good territory.
They're very helpful.
Yeah, and I would also say, Jim, if you have,
Keep going.
I don't know if you want us to, sort of work directly with any of your outreach team, but Jim, if you're aware of any,
Okay, that'll be.
brochures or posters or things like that other states have been using around, sort of
Yeah.
increasing awareness around pond sliders, maybe pass it along to Mark and Roz if we wanted to actually ramp up outreach and education around this.
We can look for those. Sure.
All right, awesome. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, I think is it just one more? I think I just wanted to follow up on a couple of the conversations that we had last time around on permitting. I just thought that a lot of times the permit conversations just sort of, we have them and then we don't really follow up. And in particular, I guess I was wondering about the development is it in Colchester, Milton, with the sedge that basically came back after the grading operation. Because I think there was some conversation about what did we think the long-term viability of this population was going to be if essentially we've got a little sedge refuge in the middle of a development. And I know we talked about fencing, we talked about art installation or something like that. And I guess I was just kind of wondering, knowing that we went ahead and granted the permit, but I'm wondering if we, went any further in terms of thinking about kind of like long-term viability of that. I guess it's this one, the Houghton's flat sedge, right? Yeah.
Were we talking about some kind of a signage to get the local people in development kind of interested in preserving this species, like it was their, I don't know, development mascot or something, I don't know, but.
Yeah, right.
So that's kind of what I remember. We talked about, putting some responsibility, on the developer to help educate people about it, the folks in the development. So, anybody remember anything else about that, where that all went?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've got some of the comments here, and I think you nailed it there, Paul. How to make a sedge interesting to a homeowners association, especially long-term. Art, the 10X sedge statue.
The sedge parade in the development, they're gonna have the sedge queen.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So, after that last meeting, and I think the
Flora Advisory Group met subsequent to that, to one of those meetings. Bob and I talked a bit, and he talked with Art Gilman in his role as the consultant for the developer. And also I had conversations with with Catherine Gessing, our lawyer, about what kind of condition could we write saying, you should try and develop find a homeowner who's willing to adopt the species. And that was kind of awkward, but Art said he would work with, talk with the developer and see what he could do, in talking with future homeowners, since he'll be doing ongoing monitoring of that spot. So the permit, I think, is silent on that part. The permit does require signage and when they do the annual monitoring, checking to make sure that the area is fenced and that sort of thing. So that's the extent that we covered that one element that we're discussing. As far as what happens to all these postage stamps or little museum pieces, particularly in sort of sandplain habitat where they're putting in developments and there's some rare or endangered species and they put a fence around it. Bob had been, has amassed a number of developments like that, and between him and the project consultants, he's got some data for a variety of species, but I'll leave that to the plant sag. If Matt, I don't know if to the extent you know about some of those other ones, but that might, the bigger question of how is that working, not just in this one spot, but in multiple spots over decades. That might be the fodder for a presentation at another time.
Yeah, I can't say that I particularly have that information at my fingertips, or Aaron probably knows it better than I. So definitely chime in, Aaron. Yeah, it's far from an ideal situation from our perspective when we're looking at these permits, particularly where there's no real connectivity to any kind of intact habitat. I mean, fortunately, with some of the species that end up involved, particularly this flat sedge, they're seed banking species, so even if they disappear for some time, there is a good chance of some level of long-term viability at the site, even though it is this kind of cut off little postage stamp. Yeah, I guess to have a more comprehensive look at that, Aaron or Bob or someone would need to kind of pull together the data. But Aaron, you want to add to that, or?
Sure. I mean, and it's one more thing to do, but I could pull together data if we wanted something more specific. But sort of general bird's eye view, what I see in the data are transplanting is pretty iffy, and that happens a lot of the sandplains transplanting like to a postage stamp and then having to survive in the postage stamp. I mean, I think maybe the survival rate initially is, 50-50, but then also the long-term viability doesn't look as good for those ones. For ones especially that aren't being transplanted, that are in those postage stamp areas, in sand plains, there often is survival. I mean, you can still have bottlenecking so that some species will kind of eventually disappear because there just isn't maybe enough of a population or enough mixing between what was once across Colchester one large meta population, but that they're maybe more isolated now. But we do have also pretty good survival of some of those, especially species like this species that is a long-term seed banker. The seeds can live for decades, much longer than the plants themselves, which only live for a few years. So in a habitat, if the management is consistent and and it's kept open, I think there's actually fairly good potential.
Yeah, and I think we did kind of talk on the management piece as well, because it seemed like this plant wasn't there, so to speak, before they started doing some work on setting up lots or kind of putting in boundaries, and all of a sudden they scrape some soil, and Houghton's flat sedge came up everywhere. So So I think that was kind of a question is, do we have, does there need to be a long-term disturbance management plan for some of these? Those sorts of things I think are just challenging. So, but, again, just kind of wondering, I don't know, to me, it just seemed like it was this was kind of a nice, I don't know, case study to kind of bring back and say, here's a bunch of issues and, we've sort of done the best we can in terms of, what you can actually do for permitting, but just wondering, I don't know, are there additional outreach opportunities? Could this be a class project for UVM where they actually do come up with an art installation or, I'm not really sure, but, to me, it just seemed like this would be a nice one to come back to.
I can say one more thing about the data, which is that a lot of our data are for smaller populations than this, where, sometimes you might have one plant of low bindweed or something where, so I think the survival really is more in question. This is really an unusually large population, and we can extrapolate that there are a lot more seeds densely in the seed bank under the soil that didn't germinate.
Yeah.
So we just know that there's a lot there. So there's already a lot of I think that can really help a population long-term survival, even if it's going to shrink somewhat over time.
Yeah. Yeah, because there was the other sedge that, didn't Art actually discover the first, like it was the only population in Vermont? We had to list it and then we had to put the permit in. Houghton's sedge.
Yeah.
I think it was like the Houghton's flat sedge and the Houghton's sedge were
Yes.
a little bit, Go ahead, Jim.
I think you're muted.
Favorite way to hear you.
I didn't take my hand down. That's a mistake.
Okay.
And
Yeah, so thanks for that, John. I think the other one then was the one that was a proposal to propagate. Was that right? Or to collect to propagate? Yeah. The rose root. And I know you said in your email that this permit was not granted. I was just wondering if the conversation had gone any further.
Yeah, and that's where I'm definitely gonna turn to Max. I think you guys have had tons of conversations about it.
Yes, we have had some further back and forth around it, and by all means, Carla and Aaron help me chime in. So a couple pieces of information. So I don't think it got circulated with materials to all of you, but subsequent to your previous consideration of the permit, Flag had more discussions, and then we went back to the applicant. We met with the applicant and then went back to him to sort of revise his research plan, provide a little bit more of the information that in Flag's first set of comments, we kind of said, we would like more information about these different points. He did that. It addressed some of them, but not all of them. I would say the biggest sort of updates or changes are that we had suggested that rather than collecting seed himself from this wild population that has previously had seed collected through the Native Plant Trust, that we authorize the Native Plant Trust to either release some of that seed to him or that they actually grow out and then give him the plants to work with rather than collecting from the wild population again himself. And he was totally on board with that, and Native Plant Trust was on board with that. I think so. I think that's sort of that's the route this would go at this point. Whether or not they actually raise plants or give him seed is still a little bit unclear to me where that landed in Bob's communications with Native Plant Trust folks. Another piece of information that came out, Bob just shared this with Carla and I in an email. You may or may not recall, a number of years ago, there was a previous permit granted for research on this species relating to its genetics, where it's scattered across various states and provinces in the Northeast here with disjunct populations. And so a researcher was looking at essentially genetic variability amongst those populations and so forth. And I guess there are some hiccups in that research, some illnesses and things that have prevented it from progressing fully to the stage of being published. But the researcher provided sort of a very, I guess, terse summary in saying that essentially their preliminary results show basically no genetic variability across the states in the Northeast. So, one of the concerns that flag folks had around the current proposal was there a risk of, essentially genetic contamination if you were either using seeds from an outside source, like we had at one point discussed, maybe he should use seed from Maine where the species is not listed. That his preference was strongly to go with Vermont sourced genetics. And so we've continued looking at that, but though it sounds like there would be unlikely to be a real risk of genetic contamination if there's truly little, if any, variability there. I think some of the remaining concerns that weren't quite addressed in his revised research proposal were, the main remaining concern was sort of final disposition of the plants at the end of the sort of 5-year permit term were this to be granted. And that, if you recall, I guess I should have reiterated the backstory here a little bit. He's interested in exploring the medicinal plant value of our native Vermont genotype plants for the rose root. And so periodically throughout the course of his growing trials, plants would be dug up and subjected to analysis for the medicinally active compounds, a lab analysis kind of thing to try to determine how Vermont grown material stacks up relative to other sources. It appears, though, that there would be some plants left at the end of all of that analysis. And so there were questions of kind of the final disposition of what would happen with those plants, given that they would be planted out into the landscape and at one particular site. And he didn't really address that question. My thought was that if there could be sort of a permit condition that essentially just gave Flag and the ESC an opportunity to re-enter the discussion at the end of that term when there's more information known about, like, well, what is the future of this line of research and potential cultivation? We would have more information on which to base opinions about what should happen to those plants. So I don't know, Carla or Aaron, if you have other thoughts around that, or are there other points that I'm missing that were?
No, I think that's a great summary, I guess. I was also going to mention the final disposition piece, because that was something that wasn't really fleshed out in the revised study plan that was submitted. And I guess the other sort of loose end from the applicant that has been raised a few times now by members of the SAG has been engaging partners. And at this point, on his behalf, Bob has done some coordination with the Native Plant Trust, and we know that they sort of would and could be on board with this, and that the applicant would and could be on board with that relationship. But something that has been encouraged has been partnership with either an academic institution or engaging a federal or even a state partner. And I don't think we've seen anything further on that, but that's something that has been sort of questioned and encouraged a couple of times now.
Yeah, thanks. It sort of seemed like the research he's exploring is actually similar to the kinds of things that, say, UVM extension does for novel potential crops, but yeah, no evidence that he's tried to coordinate there.
I had a question.
Yeah.
did you guys ever sort of look into or the applicant look into the idea of tissue culture as a way of propagating, the required amount of plants that he would need? Obviously, that would result in just a clonal selection, but it sounds like it's genetically pretty narrow anyway. So,
Yeah,
I don't know. It's kind of a great way to make lots of plants from one.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. I don't know that that has been explored at all. I don't know. Carla or Aaron, do you remember any discussion around that from Mr. Merrick?
I don't. That's a really interesting point to consider. I don't recall that that's been brought up.
I do
Yeah,
think.
I don't think it. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, I don't think it was discussed. But if you did tissue culture, then they would all be clones, as you said, and so you wouldn't get to see sort of a variation of compounds across a sort of more of a sampling across the population. Like even 5 plants might tell you more of a picture than one clone.
Right. Yeah, I think certainly if, way down the road, if this progressed to something like commercial scale production, that would probably be something that we would need to very seriously consider if there was then suddenly, a desire to go back and collect more seed from wild populations for propagation or something like that. But I maybe another consideration with that, I've no idea what's involved in tissue culture propagation, but I think, this is not a highly financed research endeavor. So, propagation from seed is probably a lot cheaper.
I don't know that answer, but one of the other factors in terms of variability with the compounds that he maybe offers after it's just cultivation, you get different results based on nutrition levels, light levels, all those kinds of things. So, it may be, another factor to increase the likelihood of getting a higher concentration of whatever chemicals he's after. But anyway.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what he was seeking to explore a little bit. I think he was interested in doing some outplanting at a particular property that he owns that has, conditions that are maybe somewhat more akin to its natural habitats in rocky outcrops. And then he's also talked about growing some in a more, I guess, a more standard kind of cultivated setting. And I think at his home in Burlington or something like that. So to get at that question a little bit. So my understanding in terms of the kind of permitting process of where this is at now is that since he's moved away from collection of seeds, that the focus is on this issue of the outplanting piece of it, since it is a listed species and the plants are of our native material.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
Yeah.
Bill, did you have something?
Two quick comments. First of all, I'd be suspicious of the lack of genetic variability across that range. I think it all depends on the genetic markers that the person's looking at. So, have a plant geneticist take a look at that. Ellen, secondly, I like really following up on some of these permits to see what the results have been. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. A couple of these were they were too fun not to come back to, I thought. So yeah. Great.
I guess as new kid on the block here, at least within the Flora SAG, getting this permit application has generated some sort of new conversations, at least during my tenure. And I wonder amongst the ESC sort of at large, is this also sort of a new curveball type application to receive from a sort of amateur Joe somebody? Or is this something that you guys have run into before to consider?
Yeah, I thought this was new. I don't know. I mean, I think Paul, you're the veteran. You're our repository of knowledge.
I'm trying to think, but I don't think of it as new and not novel. I'm just trying to remember there was some other thing that came up. I think it was with plants about, somebody wanted to propagate wild endangered or threatened species. I can't remember what it was off the top of my head, but yeah, we've seen all kinds of things. So, yeah, probably not.
It might have been the yellow poplar tulip tree a couple of years ago that came up in our.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, we certainly had some internal discussions about that. I don't think that ever progressed to a permitting discussion, but it may have come to the group. So I don't know. I don't know that Bob ever condensed lag comments on the revised research proposal into anything that got forwarded to John or to this group. So I guess I'm not sure process-wise where this needs to go. I just know that it's still pending out there, needs a resolution.
Yeah, I would say there's no additional work on your part. I think this is great to have the conversation and hear where things stand, and if it moves ahead where there's the need for another permit conversation, we can go from it there. But I just thought it was, it's just sort of an interesting enough issue, and we just, we sort of talk. I mean, we got into a fairly philosophical discussion last time. I thought it might just be nice to come back to it and revisit it. So,
yeah. John, do you, from your perspective, is this sort of a done deal, or how is this churning in the process? I'm just sort of fuzzy on what's happening with this, because my understanding is Phil's kind of just still out there waiting to hear back from all of us on if he's got a permit or not.
Yeah, same here. I was assuming there was still some communication going on between Bob and the applicant, and I wasn't, I didn't know if we had an active application yet. So waiting to, just waiting for some squeaky wheel to get a little louder.
Okay, well, I'm not sure if I want to be that squeaky wheel. I'm just, because I was literally just yesterday trying to get my head back into this, and Bob had just, quick thrown some stuff to Carla and I since he couldn't be here today. I just know that Mr. Merrick's been very, I guess, patient with us trying to work through this application with him, and he doesn't seem to have a pressing timeline, but also want to, not cause undue delay too.
Okay, I will check in with Bob and Aaron about it and figure out where that level is at, and then I'm sure they'll check with you before we start drafting a permit.
Okay, sounds great.
well, yeah, thanks everyone. Bill, I don't know if you saw what I just put in the chat, but I was just wondering if we wanted to end on some good news, if you wanted to give a little recap of the Indiana bat discovery of this summer, which was kind of welcome news.
Sure, I'll try to give a quick summary. Analysis of survey that really started in about 2008, where some Boy Scouts had put up some bat houses, and this was a revisit to that site, and found not a few Indiana bats using that locality, but maybe as many as 300, many of those with young, so it could be as many as 600 bats using the area. And this is kind of the first time they've been reported to use bat houses. So that's an important identification as well. So Alyssa Bennett has been instrumental in in making this discovery and her team working to verify it. So they've got some good press release that has occurred. Unfortunately, we didn't have a SAG meeting, so my details are fairly limited. But Alyssa will be presenting to the SAG at our next meeting.
Very cool.
It's a great conservation story because, you know, from the Boy Scouts with the bat houses to the land being conserved, and then to finding a nice result for a change. And what Alyssa's saying is that, you know, we're sort of the northeastern edge of their range, and there might be more coming as time goes on, actually, further north and east. So it's encouraging.
Yep.
And it's getting a lot of attention. She presented this to a regional group, and everybody's uplifted by it. So hopefully
Yep.
it's the start of something new.
Perfect timing for the bat meeting that's occurring here in a few weeks. So
Yeah, that's a good
there'll
chance
be
to
lots
mention
of
that.
interest at that point.
Yeah, that's January 19th to 21st. The Northeast Bat Working Group will be hosting that. So we're having to like get up to speed on that and start working on that. But yeah, I actually asked Leahy's office if Leahy could possibly give opening remarks there. He won't be as busy then. So, you know, fingers crossed.
Right.
Yeah, it is a pretty amazing story. I happen to have been involved with the very initial conversations with the landowner way back when about conserving this property as part of the local land trust here in town. And
Thanks, Paul.
yeah, one of the big things that helped move this project along, without divulging too much information. I don't know, are we trying to keep this secret where it is, or what's the deal with that,
Yeah,
Bill?
we are.
Yeah, keep it secret.
But it's in
Recorded.
Heinsberg. It's in Heinsberg, right? But one of the things that really made this project happen is we got I think it was, if I remember, it was a $500,000 grant from the feds, because we had found it was a dead elm that had, I think it was around 300 bats were counted, Indiana bats. I think it might have been Scott way back when they were doing just kind of a survey, and one night these Indiana bats just started coming out of this tree, and it was amazing. And I think it was the northernmost population at that time that anyone had ever discovered. So that was a huge push forward for the project, because it was a $3.5 million project to conserve this big chunk of land. And there was a plan to develop that very spot right where this Boy Scout did his Eagle Scout project, put up those bat houses. So it really, I mean, it was really slated. That was the developable spot on the property. So there you go.
Oh, wow.
Wow, those are interesting layers to add to this story.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, great project.
So back in those days, not only was Scott Darling doing these surveys, Steve Perrin also was a player in many of those surveys, and I was out with him many nights.
Yeah.
Great.
Very cool.
How can I get time to do that? I'd like to know.
But we'll give you permission. You can do it. Go for it.
He probably did it on his own time.
We're advisory committee here. We're giving you advice to do that.
Work-life balance advice.
Formal motion to that effect. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. All right, well, thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. Thanks for all your time. Thanks for all the work you do. And great to see everyone.
Okay, thanks, Al.
Thank you.
Nice.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alan.